All right, today we're diving into a medication with a pretty wild story. It has a very specific job, some really surprising potential, and one of the biggest safety warnings in its entire class. So let's get right into it.
So think about this. How does a drug that's been a staple, a real go-to for treating obsessive-compulsive disorder for decades, suddenly end up in the middle of a global pandemic being tested as a way to fight a virus and still, at the same time, have this reputation among doctors for being, well, really tricky to handle? That's the puzzle we're putting together today. This is the story of fluvoxamine. Okay, so first things first. What even is this stuff? Well, fluvoxamine is part of a super famous drug family you've probably heard of, the SSRIs. That stands for Selective Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitors. And their main job, their whole reason for being, is to boost the levels of serotonin in your brain. That's the chemical messenger that's a huge player in regulating things like your mood, your anxiety, all that good stuff. Okay, but how does it actually do that? The clue is kind of hidden right there in the name. It's all about tweaking this tiny but super important conversation that's happening between your brain cells all the time. So picture this. You've got one brain cell, right? It wants to send a message, so it squirts out some serotonin. Now, normally, that same cell has these little, let's call them reuptake pumps, that act like a tiny vacuum cleaner, sucking that serotonin right back up. What fluvoxamine does is it comes in and basically jams that vacuum. It blocks the pumps. And because of that, more serotonin is left just hanging out in that little gap between the cells, making the message stronger and last longer. And that's the magic trick, really. That's what's believed to create the therapeutic effect. So, with that mechanism in mind, what's this drug actually used for? Let's take a look. Okay, its number one job, the thing it's actually FDA approved for, is obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. That's its real claim to fame. But, and this is a big but, doctors also use it off-label for a whole bunch of other things. We're talking depression, social anxiety, even PTSD. Off-label just means using a drug for something it wasn't officially approved for, which, believe it or not, is super common in medicine. And yeah, we gotta talk about the elephant in the room, COVID-19. You might have seen headlines about this during the pandemic, right? There was a lot of buzz about its potential anti-inflammatory effects. And here's the bottom line. While some of that early research looked promising, it is not a standard or approved treatment for COVID-19. That's a really key takeaway here. Okay, now we need to get serious for a minute and talk about the other side of this coin. Because, like any powerful medication, this one comes with a list of side effects and some really important warnings. I think the easiest way to look at this is to break them down into two buckets. First, you've got your common side effects, the stuff that's more annoying than anything and often goes away. And then you've got the serious stuff, the things where you need to call a doctor right away. So in that first bucket, the common stuff, you'll see things like nausea, an upset stomach. That's why it's usually taken with food. Drowsiness is another big one with this specific SSRI. It can really knock you out, which is exactly why a lot of doctors tell patients to just take it at night before bed. Now, let's move over to that second bucket, the serious stuff. And right at the top is something called serotonin syndrome. Now, it's rare, but it can be life-threatening. It's what happens when you get way too much serotonin activity going on. We're talking agitation, a racing heart, rigid muscles, and the risk just skyrockets if you mix fluvoxamine with other drugs that also boost serotonin. And then there's the big one, the FDA's most serious alert, what's known as a black box warning. This applies to all antidepressants, fluvoxamine included, and it warns about a potential increase in suicidal thoughts and behaviors, specifically in patients under the age of 24. This is especially a risk right when they start the medication or when the dose is changed. That's why close, careful monitoring is it's absolutely crucial for younger people on these meds. But even with all that, there is one warning that truly makes fluvoxamine stand out from the crowd. I'm talking about its massive potential for drug interactions. You see this quote here? It uses the word notorious. In the medical world, that is a very strong word. It's not thrown around lightly, and it really tells you everything you need to know about why doctors have to be so careful with this one. And here's the reason why. Your liver has this incredible system of enzymes, think of them as a little cleanup crew, that break down drugs so your body can clear them out. Well, fluvoxamine is a potent inhibitor of that crew. It basically tells them to take a long coffee break. It slows them way down. And the result? other drugs you're taking don't get broken down properly, and they can build up in your system to dangerous, even toxic levels.
And this isn't just a small problem, it's huge. There are whole classes of drugs, like MAOIs, that are an absolute no-go. It can mess with blood thinners like warfarin, and it can make other psychiatric meds build up to toxic levels. Get this, it even slows down how you process caffeine. So your morning coffee could suddenly make you feel super jittery and keep you up all night.
So, when you step back and look at the whole picture, what do you see? You see a really powerful tool for sure, but one that you have to handle with extreme caution.
Really, it all boils down to a classic case of pros and cons. On the one hand, its big strength is just how effective it can be, especially for OCD. And that sleepy side effect can actually be a huge plus for people with insomnia. But you have to weigh that against the weaknesses, all those stomach issues, and the big one, that huge potential for dangerous drug interactions. It just means everyone involved has to be incredibly vigilant. So, fluvoxamine, it's potent, it's effective, but it's also really challenging. And, its story is just a perfect reminder of this incredibly delicate chemical balancing act that's going on in our brains 24/7. It shows us that when we try to step in and adjust that system, it's always a trade-off between some really powerful benefits and some very real risks.